Hello and welcome back to the Gamer's Tale, brought to you by the GalacticRoundtable.net. This is the third time I'm going to try to do the second episode because let's just say yesterday was a wreck. Get to that in a bit. If you hear anything in the background, that's my fan. Don't worry, nothing bad is happening. I'm going to recover what I brought up in the last two attempts into the news on War Thunder, Overwatch, and a little bit of D&D. And then we're going to move on to the history of RPGs. Now, I apologize to you, those of you who were part of the live chat or live anything yesterday, because that just sucked. Oh man, that was terrible. I was trying to do this podcast. What I was doing, I was using unfamiliar technology. In the midst of it, of me being totally uncomfortable because Pete Walters wasn't there and he's not going to be here tonight. Well, because he has a lot of stuff to take care of at home, and wish him well. But last night I was totally nervous, completely unprepared. And to save me from my own embarrassment, the power goes out in the midst of the broadcast. And wind starts picking up so hard that the chair I was actually sitting in was starting to move. And rain could actually be picked up by the mic, and it was terrible last night. Turns out that there was a tornado not too far from here that touched down, and that's why the power went out. Power went out 8:45 here, yeah, locally anyway, and was out until 1:30 this afternoon, and it was hot. And of course, I had the windows closed because don't want rain coming in. All that. I wake up after I tried to sleep in a pool of my own sweat because we don't have air conditioning anyway, and we didn't have fans. There was no wind. It was a complete and utter mess yesterday. By the way, I also got my favorite laptop back. I had a loaner last time, and it feels really good to have my baby back because it's a personal thing, and while they had to wipe the entire thing to get it back to working condition, and I had to download all my apps and other things. It's good to have your own thing back to you, like we found out last episode, which everyone has their own personal tastes in RPGs and play styles. So you find your own, stick with it, have a good time with that. Otherwise, it's going to suck and it's going to feel really, really weird. Also, if I seem like I'm rambling and tired as all get out, I didn't sleep very well, and I was not caffeinated enough today. So if you hear something like that, I'm sipping on some coffee to get myself through this. Now, hopefully this will be better executed than the last two attempts at live broadcasting. We're going to start out with War Thunder. My favorite RPG to play, mainly because I can play with one of my best friends. Historical in nature, flying vehicles, flying tanks, not flying tanks, you know what I mean. The latest update came out. It came out 2 days, not 2 days ago, a week or two ago. Update 1.59 burning arrows, which makes utterly no sense when you realize that there are no burning arrows fired by tanks in the World War II era. What they actually mean is they are using missiles, which I guess kind of look like burning arrows. Maybe they just wanted a catchy name. But they've added, I don't know, four or five new rocket tanks to the lineup, which may leave the original rocket tank that they have, the Calliope, or Calliope, as I say to annoy one of my friends. They added to its cadre. Now they have rocket tanks in Russian, British, and German lineups, in addition to the American lineup, which is what the Calliope is part of. I don't know how. Excuse me. I don't know how I feel about the rocket tanks. One, because they're almost all completely out of the league that I'm playing at currently, or require spending actual money or golden eagles on in-game. and I'm cheap as I'll get out, so I play as free to play as long as I can till they make me pay. And that's why I have no opinion on the uh, rocket tanks, because every time I try one out on a test drive, I can't figure out how to get the bloody rockets to fire. So while I can see that they are a great advantage on the battlefield, and some of them are even fly-by-wire on some of the tanks, especially the higher, like tier 6, those can be, I'm going to say, a game changer, a great game changer on the battlefield in War Thunder. In addition to all the new tanks, in addition to them being put on there, and the new planes, and it's all good, it's all nice and shining and new. But something sits, I think it takes the skill out of it. Sure, a lot of the British tanks, the new British tanks, the new British tank that has the rockets attached to it doesn't have any fly-by-wire capabilities, nor does the Calliope. But rockets have more of a, especially the guided ones that they've just added in, they take the skill out of it for me. Even though I play a lot of the time on arcade mode, which is just noob central, it still takes a bit of finesse. You have a round that kind of goes in a marginally straight line. Gravity acts upon it, it falls, and you have to be really good to be able to pierce the armor of your opponent and know which round to use. And I think I've at least gotten to that partially in my short time playing. That this edition makes will probably make the higher tiers easier to play for newer players who've gotten to that area. But it kind of cheapens it for me. It doesn't hold true to some of the older styles of combat that I prefer. It takes, my friend and I both agree that you like the harder things, the things that make it a challenge, make it all that much more worth playing. So while, yes, better tanks give you an advantage, and yes, the rockets give you an advantage, I guess it'll take more skill to avoid the rockets and to figure out how to counteract them. But there's still something inherently satisfying about using a long-range shell, whether it be from a Tiger tank, an M18 motor carriage, anti-tank vehicle, placing a good-sized round downrange, 1,000 meters away, and taking out your opponent. There's just something inherently satisfying about that level of skill to pinpoint on your enemy something that far where you don't have fly-by-wire. It's all your aiming capabilities, you figuring out the range, which they do give you a rangefinder, which that is very handy, I must admit. But getting the exact angle of your barrel to get to that enemy really sits well with me and my ego for being able to hit something that far out even if it's in a video game, without having to rely on a technological quirk of a rocket flying by a radio-guided signal. Anyway, another thing I must mention that, unfortunately, I think Gaijin is kind of screwing up. That's the company that makes War Thunder, by the way, Gaijin. They have changed the interface so darn much in like the last 6 months that when you go in there, you don't really understand why they put things there. They originally had like group invites, messages, and things like that up on the upper left-hand side of the screen between the encyclopedia and logout buttons and how much money you have and go to battle. They've now taken that and moved that to the lower right-hand corner, which I guess it can fit there, but it's, for me, who I was used to the upper left-hand side, it being there kind of threw me off. It did. And then they had some things where they go by battle rating rather than by something else, and that made it a lot easier to choose tanks, I guess. But now the original little reticle that shows where your cannon's aiming, it used to have the reload symbol go around it. Now the reload symbol kind of stays in one place and the cannon goes elsewhere. It's really, really weird. And the minimap has been updated so that what used to be nice, thin little recognition symbols saying where your enemies were when you actually had them on the radar, which I know isn't really realistic in World War II. But it makes it easier. They've made them larger, blockier, and more cartoony, which kind of cheapens the whole these are characters trying to blow you out of the sky or blow up your tank. It doesn't really sit well with me with the gut clenching ability of war. But we're going to put a nice, soft, kind of cartoony spin to it. For me, that's not what War Thunder is about. It's called War Thunder. It sounds harsh. It sounds in your face. It doesn't need soft outlined edges. Unless they're on the plane. And those are sweet lines. Anyway, in the past, War Thunder has tried something called Last Man Standing. They ran it for about 3 weeks. Last Man Standing was that when you had almost all of your men killed and within your tank, or whatever you were going with at the time, the driver, gunner, whoever was left, could switch between the driver and gunner positions, making the game last longer and be more irritable, and causing you to forget, is my guy in the driver position or is my guy in the gunner's position? Not only was everything slowed down a lot more, because he had to crawl from gunner to driver position or back and forth, he also had to load it himself, he had to fire it himself, and it kind of cheapened it. I know I'm using that term a lot, but it wasn't as clean. It made the gameplay a little bit more messy, and it threw people off because they weren't really used to being able to have one guy left, so they would I guess ignore supposedly dead enemies, or it caused you to waste 6 or 7 rounds on a single enemy when it would normally take, before Last Man Standing was implemented, 1. So there's that irritants. But it turned out that everyone hated it. Everyone hated Last Man Standing in War Thunder. So they eventually took it out, and we thought they'd learned their lesson. But now in Burning Arrows, they've decided to roll out med kits, or they call them trauma kits. They're medical kits, let's be real. Trauma packs, as my notes say. Which makes sense. Any warfighting capacity requires medical support, so it's logical that people in tanks would have stuff to patch up their comrades. The problem is, it works on the same standard as Last Man Standing. It waits till the last guy is left, then it revives one of the other characters that is in the tank back to fighting capacity, and then you have 2 crew members again. One commentator referred to it as that War Thunder didn't need this necromancer BS, which I thought was fitting because, alright, the guy has already died or is unconscious. Now you're going to wrap some bandages on him or something and he's going to be back to fighting form. No, that's not realistic. A lot of what's in War Thunder can be very realistic, although, especially in arcade, they may soften it just a little bit. Your tank goes faster, responds more quickly, your plane goes more easily, you can do more dangerous dives, stuff like that. But all in all, it's roughly realistic. Gunners get knocked out, crew members get torn to shreds. They don't show you that, of course. That would make it mature, and then they'd have a whole new set of legal problems going on. But people die in tanks, people die in anti-aircraft, people suddenly appear missing because they don't want to have bloody gouts all over the place. But suddenly you're going to tape those bloody gouts together and you're going to have a functioning crew member again? No, that's going beyond the pale. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Several weeks ago, Overwatch, apparently the beta or possibly even the live game started on. People were all, so happy about the new FPS RPG, and Blizzard laid down the law. Blizzard's now apparently adopted a no cheating whatsoever policy, banning even up to and posting the names on their China forums of 1,500 different gamer names. And some of it, they don't even let you use RPM tools, which I honestly have no idea what an RPM tool is. Apparently, it can be construed as cheating. But yesterday, as I pointed out during one of the live casts, was that a female gamer, I believe she was 17, has been exonerated of all charges of uh, cheating in Overwatch, which is good because she posted up apparently a video of her actually playing the game and actually being that good, so she wasn't cheating. So that's yay for skill. But other than that, Overwatch, I don't really know much about it. It seems like a very interesting game despite its cartoony characteristics. It fights somehow in first person. I find the overall concept of very Justice League kind of thing with only with guns to be quite interesting. We'll have to see how it pans out. Maybe you'll have long life followers like those who play RuneScape, like me, or maybe it will eventually go the way of the dodo and eventually close down to having only 1 to 2 players actually keeping the servers alive. Another thing I saw and brought up on the last Attentive podcast was that there's another Harvest Moon game coming out, Skytree Village. If you haven't played Harvest Moon, I suggest you do. You get to run your own farm. At least that was the one that I tried. And you get to do stuff like plant and grow vegetables, mine for ores, clear land, have fun with your dog. So in one rendition, you could even find a mate, wife, husband, whatever. And you could build onto your house. You could watch TV a bit, but it was mainly for the weather forecast. It rained, it snowed, it changed to autumn, it changed to winter, it changed to spring. It was just an overall fun game, and I think anything within the incarnation of Harvest Moon would be worth your time if you just want a little fun thing to take your mind off of all the really serious FPS games and other RPGs. This is just a fun little game. Well, it's probably not little, it's probably huge and complex, but it's not like I'm going to pick up my sword, I'm going to pick up my shield, and I'm going to go out and fight against the heathen of the realm, or I'm going on an adventure. I'm going to be taking care of my farm, I'm going to be feeding my chickens, I'm going to be taking care of my cows, and I'm going to be producing milk, wine, bread, and cheese, which everyone needs those things, yes. Now, we're going to get into some things that are definitely RPG related. Storm King's Thunder, the next D&D expansion pack. This 5th, I believe it is. Either it's the 5th edition or it's the 5th of September. It's going to come out. It's very giant themed. And I mentioned it was in September. I just want to make sure that's it. Giant themed. Apparently, the Giants gods have forsaken them. I don't really remember the entire story, but the Giants are now having apparently some sort of power struggle, and they take a major role within this expansion pack for Dungeons & Dragons, which, having not played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons at all, in truth, this seems like a very interesting storyline. In addition to that, there's a board game based on Storm King's Thunder, with a new set of miniatures for Icons of the Realms. Assault of the Giants, I believe it's called. Some of the boxwork looks like it came from Warhammer 40,000. It is the 5th set of Icon of the Realms, taking place in the Storm King's Thunder. It's going to be released supposedly in 2017. And we know how sometimes things drag on, or they somehow get released too early. Like some things, I think the Division was possibly released too early, because I have friends who I may try to get on here to talk about it. Said that they released it too early and they didn't have all the things in place, so it was really buggy. Anyway, enough of that. While it is true that there's probably a hell of a lot more news that happened between now and the time I took these notes and got talking points ready for this episode, we're going to move on to the history of RPGs, and it's going to still be a kind of not as close an overview as I would like. It's going to be a broad overview over the different genres and the different storylines and practices that developed into what is the modern RPG, board game, and or tabletop video game, whatever you use, whatever you play. At this time, last time, we were back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, man. Quick side note, while I was bored out of my skull with the power out, I found that I had enough change ranging from 1965, in quarters, of course, 1965 up to 1998. I had, except for 10 quarters, I had one for each year minted in that year. So as my change on my desk goes back all the way to the 60s, RPGs only really go back to the 70s, and we're going to go into the next era for RPGs, which was the 80s. The 80s expanded RPGs like no other time. Well, probably it did change a lot more in the 90s and in the early 2000s. But this was the decade that other countries and other media RPGs were found in them. No new producers came on the scene, including Chaosium. Man, I really need to work on my handwriting. They had the one with Call of Cthulhu. The first generic role-playing game system originated in RuneQuest, which was also made by Chaosium. I think that's what it is. And was also used in Call of Cthulhu. Most of these... Palladium, with Palladium World and the Palladium System, and also D20, if I remember correctly, also came out in the 80s. And they've been going strong until now. And they continue to do so. Most of these RPGs are based on the success of the sci-fi RPG Traveler. It has stats, jobs, and characteristics, more what we would think of a very in-depth RPG. So they were like the first ones to integrate, like, not only are you an adventurer, but you at one time were a baker or something similar to that. That was first found in the Traveler. Set across space, they have the different alien species and the different ideologies and different interactions, and it really was really in depth, much like human society is here. But it set the groundwork for a lot of the things. All of this led up to the generic system of the GURPS system by Steven Jackson Games. Character points to create and random characters in RPG were founded in GURPS. It appears that, for what I saw, at least, I'm sure there's, of course, somebody's going to dispute this. Everyone disputes everything. There were two major series that came out of the 80s, not the 80s. They were Palladium World, or Palladium, set in the Palladium World, and the Warhammer series. And it seems to have lasted longer in its variant of Warhammer 40,000. Now, personally, I've read a lot of research on Warhammer, especially the 40,000 variant. It is probably one of my favorite storylines to look at and just read because it's so in-depth and so realistic. It gets into another concept I want to bring up before the end of this podcast. But I will not touch on Palladium World because I didn't research it, and I was hoping to have someone from Palladium on here with Wadsworth, but that doesn't look like it's going to be happening in the near future. So I'm going to be focusing on Warhammer. One, because I'm a dungeon master, and two, because it's really a fun world. All right, Warhammer takes three forms. The first is Warhammer Fantasy Battle, setting of armies and groups with a very heavy Germanic influence. It takes place near the Renaissance time on a slightly different variation of Earth, but it is Earth, hence the Germanic Really, it takes place in the ideas of how Charles Martel and his son and his grandson Charlemagne united Europe underneath the Holy Roman Empire. And it takes that concept with one of the characters, and he unites a lot of the different realms together and absorbs their fighting forces and their fighting styles to combat the corruptive influence of chaos. This really dark and subversive element that's up in the Northland, which would be in modern uh, North Pole area, where the Viking kind of people live in constant terror of it and constantly fight against it. Meanwhile, in one part, during the time when the Charlemagne style character is rising to power, people are being attacked by giant rat like creatures who live underground and enslave people, causing eventually the times of the Black Death. That's interesting because this is one of the rare RPGs that's not set in a purely medieval setting or medieval fantasy selling? No, not selling. Setting. There we go. It takes place just before the Renaissance, so there's firearms involved, although most likely very rugged ones, either matchlocks, uh, wheellocks, or flintlocks, which are various early forms of gun mechanisms. Uh, and so it varies the combat between having people on horses with swords and spears, people on foot with swords and spears and other pole arms, to people having guns and pistols. And they were, in real life, a very big game changer because they could perform equally well as a bow and sometimes outperform them. The bow, especially the longbow, outperformed the early rifles and guns with speed and sometimes in accuracy. But the only difference was that you could teach a peasant how to accurately fire a musket a lot easier in a lot less time, and how to clean it more easily than you could train a good archer in the time. I think if it could be, you could probably train one guy to fire and load and reload and continue just firing a musket in an hour or two or a day, compared to what could take a lifetime to master the art of the bow. There's that interesting little tidbit, along with the fact that even large lead balls fired from muskets could crash through plate mail more effectively than some arrows could. So that adds the interesting part. The next various rendition of Warhammer was an RPG kind of individual grouping. It was not as focused on squad combat as the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Okay. The RPG's first edition for character abilities in the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle expanded from 1 to 10 to 1 to 100. XP was apparently gained in dice. XP was gained through. Wow, that's really crappy handwriting. Something had to do with dice, and it was part of the equation and applied to the rolls, how they, according to circumstances, change the signature of the spell. They change from signature spells, generic spells like cast magic or whatever, to rather specific and specializations within it. So you have your water mage, your air mage, your electricity mage, what have you. And with the risk of chaos manifestation, which was they become more and more corrupt and more likely to beat old ladies with sledgehammers. If you get that reference, you're awesome. In the third edition, it was a completely new set of rules. 7 types of dice unique to that game were introduced. So other than being completely unique and a pain in the butt to replace, making you have to go to whoever produced Warhammer, it added that new kind of new panache, I would guess you would say. And my favorite thing, HeroScape, they eventually added proprietary dice. They started out with proprietary dice, 6-siders that only had for attack and defense. Then they had ones for the specific types of heroes, or not heroes, the specific generals that you could command troops from. It all gets very complex when you add um, uniqueness to the dice that you use. Now, Warhammer, this was what it was called after Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which was what it was based on. It was based off of that world. It focuses in a more D&D like way on the individual character. Like, okay, we have a banker from whatever town, made up town that they have there, and he goes on an adventure and he does this, and because he was a baker, he has more of an affinity for this, but he's also some sort of adventuring swordsman. Or he eventually became a mercenary for some unbeknownst reason, so you can get really in-depth with the backstories. But it also kind of adds more of a pain in the butt if you just want a game that you just kind of roll up, do some stuff, kill some stuff, go home. Now, my favorite rendition, they had an accompaniment to Warhammer, which was Warhammer 40,000 or Warhammer 40K, however you want to pronounce it, which takes place in the 40th millennium. So it's like they take Warhammer Fantasy Battle and they throw it into the distant future, and that's kind of how the tagline goes. In the far reaches of the grim future, there is only war. And I mean, despite how cheesy that sounds when I say it out loud, it feels so good on the inside. It doesn't really paint that much of a picture, but it gets my blood pumping because, like, ooh, there's stuff happening. There's a bleak, almost post-apocalyptic kind of feel to it. It's a dystopia kind of a thing, because anything that I find with a utopian kind of ideal through the world governments and things like that, I find to be highly suspicious. Dystopian seems a little bit more realistic to me. It's Warhammer 40K is currently in its 7th edition, which tells you how well it's been doing. It was heavily influenced by Dune, the Dune series, and Paradise Lost, which is a religious work by I forget who actually wrote Milton, I think it was. But anyway, it waxes poetic and waxes religious a lot. Though the Rogue Trader Inquisition was more RPG-like compared to the other examples of Warhammer 40,000, where you have the Holy Space Marines against their heretical brethren fighting out between the realms of chaos versus the God Emperor. They fight together through the utter betrayal of themselves, because supposedly, according to them, the God Emperor is the God. And they decide to go after the gods of chaos, such as Slanesh, the god of pleasure, and Khorne, the god of blood, which, given some of the people who actually follow him, is rather disturbing and quite, you don't want to run into him. No, don't do that. But it brings me to not my final talking point. I'm sure there probably will be more. But several weeks ago, before the first episode of the podcast, I read on RPG blog, just the title, not the entire blog, so bear with me. I didn't get what he was getting at, but he asked the question, should politics play more of a role in RPGs? Now, I'm sure he didn't mean politics right now, because we're in an election year, and that just really sucks because I'm tired of politics. But I think he meant, should politics take more of a lead role within the RPG itself? Now, I found this question quite interesting, otherwise, I wouldn't be bringing it up. But I thought that politics had always played a role within an RPG. If you think about it, it's ever present. It's part of the backdrop of a really good story. Whether it takes a forefront or not is left up to the story and the individual who's telling it. But if you think about it, my personal opinion is that any good story has two. It falls underneath one of two catalysts. That either a political motivation, such as a king trying to regain his lands, a deposed king, revolution, freedom fighting, things like that. One kingdom invading another, one government invading another. That falls underneath politics for me, or power. But both things go under power. The other is a religious catalyst, or more likely a combination of the two. And we find that catalyst in the Warhammer series. Currently, in Warhammer Fantasy Battle and also in Warhammer 40,000, there's the Lord God Emperor. Only the Lord God Emperor in Warhammer isn't to the deification that he gets to in Warhammer 40,000, but he's still the king. He defeats and joins the various tribes together that have been warring for untold decades. He gathers them together to strike out against the foe that is chaos. So there is both in Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 a political aspect. We want to get everyone under one control to face an existential threat. In Warhammer 40,000 exhibits itself as Xenos species, Slanesh, the Chaos Gods, the Eldar, with the Elven renditions and all their weirdness, and the Necrons. And in Warhammer 40,000, which I am more well versed in than Warhammer, so if I say Warhammer and I don't say 40K, or it sounds too futuristic for a pre-Renaissance setting, I actually mean Warhammer 40,000, and it's just a slip of the tongue, because I didn't know before a couple of weeks ago that there was Warhammer Fantasy Battle in existence. But Warhammer 40,000 has all of mankind spread across the stars, colonizing, doing things, fighting other species, trying to survive in an unforgiving environment, even more so unforgiving than planet Earth is currently. The use of force is almost a necessity in these war-torn areas, which range from desolate planets that you wouldn't even want to set foot on to bustling metropolises and hive cities where it's like Chicago or New York stacked on top of each other times 100, and for the entire purpose of building machinery and providing, for lack of a better term, slaves for the war machine. What else? But so there we go. Warhammer 40,000 gives us a good example of a good blending between the two major, what I believe to be the two major catalysts in a good story. We have religion, the not Neonites, what are they called? The Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes. They worship the Lord God Emperor, and they are religiously motivated. They're religious zealots like nobody's business. They're biologically engineered to be the best fighting machines of near human you can get. That's why they refer to it as the Adeptus Astartes, because they're a step above mankind, because they no longer are truly mankind. So they pledge heart and soul to the Emperor, or, in the case of the heretical chapters of the Space Marines, they go against the Emperor and serve the gods of chaos. So we have a religious schism between the deified human, who is admittedly slightly beyond human recognition because he is now a spirit being fed with the thousands of, for lack of a better term, magicians. They're called psychers in the style. Fed to him as sacrifices a day to sustain him in his incorporeal form upon the golden throne, compared to what came out of the warp, which was the gods of chaos, Slanesh, Khorne, and the other two, because there's 4 gods of chaos. Which, side note, 4 was a mystical number to the Native American Indians. So there's another layer of how culture influences our fiction, which you should check out on the fictional reality series on my blog, which I'll tell you about at the end of this podcast. But beyond that, we also, beyond the religious schism between chaos and what was referred to as order, there is also the schism between the various political spectrums. We have the Imperium of Man, headed by the God Emperor, going up against the races of the Eldar, who come in both chaotic forms and non-chaotic forms. But either way, they kind of dislike humans. They think of us in one rather hilarious, I will admit, rendition where they're like asking the God Emperor a question on YouTube. I don't know, I forget the exact YouTube channel for it. But he says that pretty much the Eldar think of us as apes with very simple tools. I'm quoting him, probably now paraphrasing more likely. But the Eldar think humankind is the scum of the earth. So they hate us. So they fight against us, and we don't really get along very well with them. Then there's the Xenos, who just want to eat everything and create hives everywhere. So that's another expanding force. And lastly, but not least, there's the Necrons, who just want to... No one really knows what the Necrons do. They're just kind of there. Robotic skeletons. Cool as that might sound, it's really hard to determine their motives. So Warhammer 40,000. The 2 great catalysts, religion and politics, are at the forefront of the entire conflict. And it's easily seen through that this is the way it kind of is. Obviously, this is kind of how the world is today. But it deals with it in a way that we can understand. It's far in the future. Doesn't have the same consequences as the news today does, so we get to analyze it better, and it's an allegory to what we think the world can become if it goes the wrong way. So RPGs, in that respect, tabletop ones specifically, because they give you so much more leeway, because you can choose your own self, other people, what you want to be. They allow you to explore the possibilities in this world. And they give you a canvas with which to paint upon. And I'm sure it has some parts filled in, such as for the Warhammer ones, we have the various factions, Eldar, Chaos, Order, the various different subsets of Space Marines. But they have a realism to them that we can express some of our frustration against, such as the Inquisition within the Imperium of Man, which is the intolerant side of human nature, personified. Anyone who questions the norm is pretty much whisked away by them, and they're the shadowy secret police within the Imperium, ready to snatch and do away with anyone who questions Lord God Emperor, and makes it a very repressed society, compared to within the Space Marines, who fanatically believe in an almost Viking-esque style of Valhalla. Dying isn't that bad. You'll live to fight another day, or you'll die a hero. So we have the zealotism of mankind in there. And then we have the poor guys who get minced up in between the daemons and the Space Marines, between Chaos and Order. There's just the regular guardsmen who are expected to stand and fight and be killed just because they are the individual, because they had nowhere else to go. They went into the army because they needed the money, or they wanted to get away from whatever they were leaving. So it's true, like the French Foreign Legion or even the military of the United States. So, even more adding on to the allegory of RPGs is actually really human life condensed. But anyway, the only reason why I wax philosophical is because of my other job. Technically, it's not a job because I don't get paid yet. Is to philosophize and to guide people in how to interact with people, and you need to know what motivates an individual in order to be able to help them or hinder them, depending on how it's applied. So politics, I believe, at least in regards to RPGs, has always been there and always will be there because it is a necessary part of creating conflict in the story and creating a believable reason for why you're on the quest or why things are happening. If there's no viable reason for an individual to do something, the story falls flat. It doesn't have as in-depth a thing. It doesn't captivate you as much as it should. So religion and politics, the big taboos that you can't talk about in polite social graces, are really the best catalyst for a great story. Speaking of great stories, last episode that I actually succeeded in getting through, we talked about red markets, and that they're doing really well. At least last time I posted on the Gamer's Tale website, or not website, Facebook page, they had almost 3 to 4 times the estimated number that they were shooting for. So that tells me that there's a lot of people interested in this thing. Red markets, of course, being an RPG based on what people would do within quarantine zones after the zombie apocalypse. And the reason why it's called red markets, I came to find out because random memory from what I learned before finding out about red markets is that red markets in economic terms refers to an economic setting where anything has a price. It differs from black markets in that black markets you can buy weapons, food, outlawed items, some outlawed items like drugs and things that are like banned for seemingly arbitrary reasons. Those things you can get in a black market, but things that are more morally questionable, for lack of a better term, are found completely in red markets. So what people think of as human trafficking, prostitution, and things like that, those really, really despicable crimes and practices are actually red market products. People have prices. Whatever you want has a price in a red market, hence the term red market. So you're going to be, I predict that if you play the game, you're going to see a lot of people either ending up with characters that are participating in prostitution, encountering a lot of prostitution, slavery of some form, selling of Twinkies, just to make this a little lighter, selling of weapons, selling of goods from toilet paper to canned goods to used electronics to cabinets. Red markets, for me, I think it promises to be a very compelling because it is the extreme end of capitalism. The most immoral corners of the economic system that you can get are going to be exemplified in this RPG. Now, of course, it's probably going to be left up to the individuals who play it, how far they go into it. But it'll give a good example for economics classes, college analyses, and schooling. This could be a very educational game, in my opinion, because it takes it to the extreme, something that sometimes occurs in the world. Things get taken to extreme, so we get to go to the extreme in this game without actually literally harming people. So it's kind of a safe environment to which to explore it. But other than that, it's been about an hour, so we have to wrap up. Or maybe it hasn't been an hour. Maybe it's only been 45 minutes because I forgot when I started. But I'm going to wrap it up. You can find us at Podbean, at least the first episode. We're affiliated with the galacticroundtable.net, and we thank them a lot for having us on. and having us be one of their channels. But you can find me personally. I'm Trent Gander. I am always and probably always will be your humble dungeon master for the evening or day whenever you listen to this. You can find me at the Gamer's Tale on Facebook, where you can like us and follow us and get little tidbits every now and then whenever I'm actually able to post something on there. If you feel free to share it on Facebook also as well. You can also find me on the Diary of a Sith Chick pages, which is Diary of a Sith Chick, DSC Jedi Archive, Fet's Locker as Atten Goran. You can also find me on Dear Diary or Order 66 Revenge of the Diary. There's also a Facebook group called that, Order 66 Revenge of the Diary, which you should go like. Shout out to my fellow admins at Diary of a Sith Chick. In addition to that, you can also check out my personal blog page on Facebook, which is The Irreverent Gentleman. You can also check out my blog, The Gentleman's University of Manliness.wordpress.com. You can find links to that at the Facebook page. In addition to that, you can try to find me elsewhere. You can find me on Twitter at Trent James Gander or at Gent de Irreverent, because the Irreverent Gentleman was already taken. You can usually find me underneath that, except on Twitter. So, enrollment, you can get tutored by me for philosophical things from Irreverent Gentleman. Send me a message. You can reach me anywhere on Irreverent Gentleman or any of the Diary of Sith Chick pages. Just hit us up. And if I don't see it, one of the other admins there will let me know, and I'll get back to you as soon as I'm able or willing to. Other than that, we hope to see you next time. Share The Gamer's Tale wherever you can. Check out the other things brought to you by thegalacticroundtable.net, and check out Diary of a Sith Chick and the DSC pages, as well as their blogs, because they're just a great group of people. They put out some really great content, and it's nerdy as all get out, but it's totally worth it. So with that, I wish you adieu, and we will fade out as lights go down and more awesome music plays. Have a nice evening.